So let's get started. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we are all gathering from today and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I'd love to know where you're from. So please pop your location into the chat. And can you add the First Nations land group as well and acknowledge the country that you're joining us from? Which would be wonderful. So please introduce yourself and get involved. Today's topic is all around high performance teams. We're going to dig into a whole lot of different layers around this topic. And I've got some super exciting news. We do have 5 copies of Pete's brand new book. It's called Lead, 12 Extraordinary Insights for Every School Leader. All you have to do is just engage. Just jump on the chat, ask questions, share some thoughts, share a resource, like some comments, just get involved, and we will choose from the chat after today fairly randomly, and we'll announce the 5 winners of Pete's brand new book, hot off the press, which will, those announcement will come out in our post-program email. So welcome. Thank you to those people who are popping into the chat, locations, and letting us know where you're from. Welcome. We love to hear from you. So please continue to use the chat for anything that you'd like us to dig into as part of this conversation. In fact, I'd love you to get started with, what's topical for you right now in the team that you're part of, or the teams that you're part of in your school. We're going to dig deeper into that too. What would you love to know about from this topic right now? And give us some insight. We'll do our very best to keep an eye on the chat and to bring that into the conversation. I'm super excited to have Dr. Pete Stebbins with us today. I won't do a full bio read, but Pete is a workplace psychologist and an executive coach, extensive experience in both education and health sectors. Pete specializes in leading team development and school improvement. And I'm not going to go any further because Pete will tell us more about himself and the work that he does. Look, I've been super excited for this because I, for one, personally have been quite influenced by this work. So Pete, thank you so much for being with us. It's really great to have you. But to get us started, first question, I'd love it if we could rewind just a little bit. Can you tell us about you? What was school like for you? What did you do after you left? What motivated and interested you at that time?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you for having me on. What was school like for me? School was really tricky for me. My father was a religious minister, so we moved around from parish to parish, so to speak. And it was, I wasn't so much a survivor. It was a really tough time. And so in primary school, unfortunately, I was bullied a lot. I had a lot of trouble sort of fitting in there. And then in high school, again, a whole lot of trouble socially. Reasonably stable in high school though, but by then I was probably, that ADHD, ADD kind of profile, mainly to do with sort of what they call little T traumas that had accumulated. So I wasn't doing the best academically, certainly wasn't necessarily fitting in. I was one of those fringe kids or outsiders. So that's a quick history there. What was interesting though is every now and then a teacher would take an interest in me and would discipline me or challenge me in ways that were entirely different to every other teacher and every other experience in the school system. And some of those things I wasn't so grateful for at the time, but as I wrote in the Leading Flourishing Schools book, one teacher, Dr. Slade, had a particular way of investing and persevering with me because back in the day, if you weren't paying attention, if you weren't doing very well, the assumption was you weren't very bright intellectually. Therefore, you were avoiding it because you couldn't handle the learning. But as we all know here, there's a whole nother kettle of fish there, which is kids that are not stimulated enough by the learning.
Mm.
So again, they go into this behavior. So to cut a long story short, at the end of all of this, I get into psychology. I did extreme sports and things to escape all that. After psychology and rehabilitation, I become a clinician. I do that forever. I get caught up in work cover claims and going to court as an expert witness and arguing about diagnoses. I jump over that into prevention. And so that's where I drift into this stuff. I'm like, okay, I've sort of done everything I can, PhD and otherwise, on the clinical side. What would it take to change the culture so we didn't have all these work cover claims? We didn't have all these stress claims. What's really causing the problems in the first place? And that was, if you like, the birth or the entree into the work I've been doing for the last 20 years.
Yeah, so that kind of begins to get into the next question that I wanted to ask is kind of like that founder story, particularly with this work into schools. So you kind of touched on the catalyst for the work, but was there a particular challenge or turning point which you thought this is the problem that I need to solve and this is the work that I want to do?
Yeah, look, two things come to mind. Firstly, the turning point from the kind of clinical role into the organizational role. I remember we used to do these in the late 1990s. We do these investigations and take statements and affidavits. And there I was in the midst of some big government kind of furor and work cover stress claims. And one of the sort of most senior government officials kind of shut the door and privately looked at me exasperated with this, look, I know this, the way we've done this is wrong. What I don't know is what's right. And so that was like a catalyst I'll never forget. I still remember that person's face, name. I remember the building I was in and the view from the window. And it really was more important to turn my attention to preventing things. The story from schools then, because I worked across hospitals and health, as you said in your introduction before schools, was an encounter with a bunch of wonderful principals from the Darling Downs region back in 2013, 2014, and many of them are still there today, or school supervisors. And they decided to they'd had enough of how things were running, and they invited me in to talk about what a best practice organization would look like. And that's something I knew a lot about by then. So it was but I didn't know enough about the ins and outs of schools. But they were open-minded enough to say, right, if this is a high-performance team and if this is what's going to make an organization flourish in any sector, let's make it work in our sector. And that, in a short answer, then the rest is history. It's kind of built from there.
So we really want to dig into that topic of, and thank you to the question in the chat is, wanting to hear about positive school team culture. But I guess it's a really important place to start is what do we mean by team? Can you kind of unpack the language a little bit around teams and groups and what does it look like in schools?
Well, that was one of the first interesting encounters, if you like, as we started 10, 11, 12 years ago to mesh this work in, is to start with, well, we would know what a team is as organizational psychology. Anthropology tells us that. So it's like the family, the village, the tribe. So we kind of go like team, department or faculty or upper school, lower school, all depend on the size of the school, to the whole organization or the tribe, the whole school. So that's kind of like a no-brainer if you're an anthropologist. But you walk along in and start talking to principals about that, and everybody's got a one eyebrow in the air. Everyone's like, hang on a minute. We're all one big team. It's like, no, well, you can call yourselves what you like, but anthropologically, no, you're not. You're one tribe. You're one organization. Oh, well then, I reckon our middle school's the team and then our whole school's the whole thing. It's like, well, maybe, but let's break it down a bit. Is that, groups of 5 to 7, or if they have to be larger, like 15 to 20 and say a high school faculty, are they structured in a way where they can still operate in those cells of 5 to 7? Because that's how it's worked for hundreds of thousands of years. We're not likely to be able to break or outsmart the very basics of teams. So one is, how do we actually apply a proper team grid onto a school? And then the second thing, of course, is how do we then mesh that into the industrial relations agreements about how much time they meet and what do they do, and then how do we work that out? And obviously that's where the last 10 years has been, to take and create the high performance teams model for schools so that we adhere to all of the constraints and the limitations, but we equally co-construct all the good bits that allow these teams to flourish.
Yeah, that's really super interesting. And I guess if we dig into developing high performing teams, or if that might be the high performing tribe, what are some of those behaviors that we would be looking for in a positive team culture? And what might be some strategies or first steps that schools can take to kind of head in that direction?
Yeah, absolutely. So to continue with the story, the first bridge we have to cross when we're at school is actually identifying, well, who are the teams? And if we don't do that bit, then everything else, there's still lots we can do to make small groups of people work well together in the school context. Of course there is. But if you don't clear that up before everything else, you kind of, you got loose foundations. And the biggest problems we have at the moment, and arguably since the work began, are still the same. And that is we don't map out what teams are versus committees or groups versus what a department or division is. And that's in the responsibility of the leadership team to do that work. Obviously, we quickly get to the point of working out what these smaller groups are, but we have to make sure we know that are they a team? And that's about the amount of common interaction and common responsibility they share. Or are they a group or committee? And they're defined as not day to day sharing the same responsibilities. They come together to solve a problem or work on something for the greater good.
Mm.
So apologies for going back just one step, but when that work is done and we go, right, there's our committees, groups, PLCs, whatever they are, right, that we'll go forth and be awesome and do that. And these are our teams. And then we can go to your point, which is to say, okay, these teams, are they sufficiently clear within themselves? Have they got their IKEA instructions that they've co-constructed together about what they're doing with 10-week term and what's due when amongst themselves with their teaching and learning? Have they got a team profile? Have they understood the personalities and mapped and documented all that stuff so people can mesh in easily? And what would otherwise be a rub and awkwardness, people can kind of go, oh, I understand that person in the context. I can deal with that. And so again, I won't go into all of the detail, but there's a set play, if you like, of what we call the 12 team system documents that take a couple of hours, or you do a little bit each week, and then in a couple of weeks' time, you've got this full IKEA manual. You're good to go.
Yeah, interesting. I want to just dig into what you said around, it is the responsibility of a leadership team to get those structures right. We have lots of people listening in various roles, and maybe it might be that someone needs to manage up a little bit around trying to influence that work to happen. Do you have any advice for what people can do to kind of help maybe get that work clarified and that structure in place?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, yeah, I do. I do. There's sort of two angles to this. The first angle, as we said, is to identify or share or make a suggestion to the leadership team that what we call the collaboration map. Got some really cool short videos on YouTube about how a principal or a leader could look at this and go, oh, yeah, I get that. Yeah, that's cool. If people think we need to clear that up. So share a resource, float an idea or a suggestion. And you can do that through a LinkedIn blog post or hit me up in the off the website. Just fill out the contact form. It'll come to me and I'll flick you back the vid or something that you could just float. But you're right, that requires the leadership team to properly engage in that piece of work. Regardless of that, as we say, the revolution always starts in the streets. And you can still go ahead with your team. We've got a number of examples of this right now across Australia. And you can say, right, here we are. We're designated by the leadership team to do this work, and let's build our IKEA instructions. Are we all on the same page about this? Here's a couple of quick, we use sticky dots with the platinum rule. So my phone, here's my personality expressed as 2 quick dots. Have we got all the prompts and cues and scaffolds floating around? We get each other. And then what's our 30, 60, 90 plan? Have we got that done? Again, all our templates are freebies, downloads. The idea of our work is simply to contribute to a bigger puzzle. So they can use the templates that are freely available from us and just start scribbling with pens, or they might have their own in-house school inquiry cycle templates, etc. Do the work, map it on the wall, and just get cracking. And that's what we would say, because nothing you do in the HBT space is at odds with anything else you might be doing in the school. It's all complementary.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that's come up in the chat right now, which I'd like to dig into, I guess, is, if you are doing this with some reluctant team members, or maybe if the confidence wasn't there to jump on board with this, do you have any advice or suggestions around how to kind of bring people on the journey?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So Oh yeah, so the phrase we have is you don't have to like it, you just have to do it. And so what we're trying to what we encourage people to do is to simply participate where they're at. And if that means they say pass or come back to me, or, as we're brainstorming out our action plan or doing our team program, whatever the aspect is, as long as they're prepared to simply stay in the room, they'll get to it. And so there's two layers to this as I think it out. One is I'm wanting to ask people to get some of our clarity together as a team, and I'm a team member. And so then I'm saying, hey, why don't we fill out our team profile today? Or why don't we just do this little thing and or document this up so we're all clear about it? If my peers are saying, no, I don't want to do it, that's tricky because all I can do is get all the input from those that do and then pin it up on the wall. But that is still an ace because unless somebody adds to the information, that becomes the point of truth from that point on.
Mm.
So the last thing you want to do is stress because half your team mutinies on you. The other half, you guys still do what you do. You place it there. It's your working map. And the others are invited in to edit and change it anytime they like. But in the absence of them contributing, there's still a reasonable point for you to progress whatever the team's doing. So that'd be one quick tip is to say, take the coalition of the willing, get cracking, but do it in a way where there's always an opportunity for others to join in. But don't let them say, well, because I didn't do it, I'm trying to cross my hands in front of the camera, because I didn't do it, it's not valid. No, that's not true at all. Because one student decides in the class not to participate, that does not make the lesson invalid. And so it's about saying your input remains valuable and we're looking forward to it. But in the meantime, we're going with what we've got.
Mm. You started to touch on a little earlier about I guess, the co-constructed protocols or, the team dynamics that are agreed upon. What kind of suggestions might there be for someone who wants to get a process like that in place?
Yeah, so in our parlance, I guess we have two things we know in education that play in this space. One is meeting norms or meeting rules. And in HPT, we don't negotiate or co-construct those. They're set, and they're set under Institute Company Directors, ASX 200. They're just set as in these are appropriate things that are going to bring out a great meeting. So we don't encourage teams or schools to set meeting norms or have big chats about what effective meetings should look like. We encourage them to adopt best practice. And that's really, really important for everyone listening because you'll be expected in a school to go to different meetings with different people in the room. So if each meeting has its own meeting norms, there's this horrible inefficiency you've created because you can't simply behave the same way and contribute the same authentic input every time you meet. You've first got to orientate to the variable meeting norms. So we're not a fan of that. We just have a set rule that we train for and we adopt. But we take the complete opposite view about how we work together day to day outside our meetings. And we say we absolutely have to co-construct and get really clear. And we call this the above and below the line behavior chart in HPT land. That's what it's called. And again, it's about saying, well, what are the things that we're already doing or that we could do more of? And that makes us shine. That really makes us all shine. And then conversely, what are the below the line things? Maybe they're things we'd never do, but a new person may not know that. So we better document it. Or maybe they're the subtle things that sometimes we do that really actually make people feel invalidated, in which case we should document it. So we document our above and below the line in summary to guide our day-to-day working interactions, and we stick with the best practice meeting rules, if you like, for any meeting that we're in.
Yeah, cool. We're getting into that space around helping people feel psychologically safe, etc. With the range of complexities that are occurring in schools, staff turnover, burnout, initiative fatigue, things like that, this sounds like it's also the wellbeing work. Is this the wellbeing work?
Yeah, look, back when we describe or use what we call the HPT or high performance teams framework, it is the work to answer that, but it's more than that. Because if you look at the pyramid, if you like, of HPT, we say to be a high performance team, you have to achieve well and you have to engage well. So we go from one thing up here down to two things. Then we say to engage well, there's 2 things below that. So we end up with 4 things at the bottom, 2 in the middle, 1 at the top. To engage well, you have to understand and respect and support people's what we call work life and wellbeing context. You got to know about that to some degree so you can empathize with it, you can support it. And you have to leverage diversity. You have to actually understand the individual differences to the point that you can then bring out the best in each other. Understanding each other and respecting each other and having enough trust and safety to disclose your context, well, I would suggest that those are the 2 biggest pillars in what I guess we now call the wellbeing work. The other side of the HPT framework, though, is about achievement. And that's to say that you have to engage well and achieve well. And you can only achieve well if you have a culture of what we call performance reporting. In other words, the meetings, metrics, systems, and stuff is all lining up so you can do your best. And you're clear on what your number 1 priority is at any given moment, because you can't have several number 1 priorities at the same time. That just won't work. So look, I think the wellbeing movement, if you like, is as it should, has branched ever more from the engagement side over into the achievement side if we're to marry HPT and the current trends of wellbeing together. And I think that's wonderful. That's wonderful, because we would always argue back in 2012, 2010, 2001, that high performance requires well-being. You cannot have sustainable high performance without high levels of well-being in your teams. They're what we would call a mutually inclusive category.
Yeah, cool. Now, look, I want to take a minute to just remind everyone the chat is available. If you're hearing something you'd like us to dig into or a different aspect of the conversation, please pop a question in the chat. Nick, you have a question.
I do have a question. I'm super curious, Pete. I want to dig into, I imagine in schools, like schools are not, the same thing doesn't happen across a school context in the same fashion, right? So you have like pockets of practice happening here and pockets of practice happening here. Often, I would say, coming from a secondary context, this is particularly evident in secondary contexts where you've got departments and faculties and PLCs and like lots of like groups that are operating at one time. I think what I would love to ask, and I'm kind of curling through the question, is if you're a leader in a school, what symptoms would you be seeing within your school context that would tell you that you have a problem with your team being a high-performing team? In other words, what is the stuff that would be happening on the ground that you would be seeing or noticing that you might, like, so I'm imagining people in the room that if you were to call out maybe 6 or 7 trends within schools that are maybe not operating effectively, what is the stuff to look out for? What are the red flags or even the orange flags or the slightly not green flags that we should be looking for within school context that kind of signpost that there's some work to do here with our teams?
Yeah. Again, I kind of see 2 layers to this. There's how do I answer that question if I'm I guess a peer or a middle leader or team member, and then how do I see this question if I'm a senior leader? But if we start with the senior leader level, which may blend into that answer, look, one of the things that we would educate them about is this thing called the Goldilocks zone of collaboration. And that's where we don't have too little collaboration, which is less common these days, but equally where we don't have too much or excessive collaboration, which is the big problem. So if we go back to a large, say, P-12 or mega large secondary environment where there's all those different layers and operating things, the risk they have is excessive collaboration. What does that mean concretely? Well, there are 2 things we would look at. Firstly, we'd look at the amount of information channels and the amount of information connection points that any given teacher has to operate with. And we could map that. It's a very simple meeting communication mapping thing. Again, jump on our downloads button if they want to do the tick and flick audit. And then you can quickly determine, hang on, we've got too little, just the right amount, or excessive collaboration. If I've got excessive collaboration, I know we've got to get back to the team, sorry, Nick, but if I've got excessive collaboration, the first thing I've probably got is poor design in team channel communication, meaning that I either don't have the teams right and have to go back there and sort of tidy that up, or the way when teams meet, the communiques that the portals of transference of information, the line management structure. Like, it still amazes me that most schools don't have a single designated line manager per employee. right? Now, the Australian workplace law in every state, you're only supposed to have one line manager. Everyone else, if you report to them, you're reporting to them under legal terms, under industrial terms, you're reporting to them as a professional manager. And that's called a dotted line, whereas a line manager is a straight line. So you take a look at the scenario you just described, and then you ask someone in leadership with a pen to go, where's the point? Give me the straight line of whoever it is. Pick a random staff member. Who's their straight line manager? And who are the dotted lines? And then that goes straight back to where you're taking it now and say, right, is that straight line, that's therefore the team leader of that team. Does that person line manage other people in wherever that is? And before you know it, you've diagnosed whether or not you've got excessive collaboration in terms of a confused line management structure, or whether you've got literally a single ultimate person I can report to. And this is important when you belong to two faculties in a high school. Okay, which HOD is my line manager and which one is my professional report? Anyway, I'm going down a rabbit hole there, apologies. The other thing that matters here, though, is Robin Dunbar's anthropological work and Dunbar's number. And that's the number of 150, the maximum number of relationships a typical human can tolerate before they just start forgetting things. Interestingly, 5 is the inner circle of Dunbar's number, which comes back to that idea of the core team. If you count out the number of people that belong to all of these different groups, you can take a single staff member and you can count the number of students, parents, staff that they're supposed to know about and contribute with. And so if you fail the Dunbar's number test, which almost every large high school does, and if you fail the dotted line straight line test, well, that will be the first reason why collaboration isn't optimal. And the good news is that will be the first thing that is entirely within the control of the leaders to fix. The other signs are more obvious. So in our schools, the team pulse data that they measure every week comes out every month. You'll see problems with peer support in particular. Some of the indicators will be worse than others. And of course, you'll see your HR indicators, particularly your sick leave stats. That's a telltale sign. But I'm sorry, I might be sort of heading into too much detail there, Nick.
It's fascinating. Loving it. Did you have
No, that was great.
there?
No, I was just going to say, I remember one of the first times that I engaged with Dunbar's number was when I read Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point, and it was talking about it from a business structure point of view, because I forget the organizational name. I think it's in the last article that I just dropped in, but they actually capped their businesses to 150, and then they would open up separate sites rather than grow the company bigger from that. So I have also heard of different principals when they're starting new school contexts cap the community size at 150 as well. So it's a really interesting number to think about. And then the applicability of that within schools, particularly in Queensland, where we've got, public schools that are at 3,000 and 4,000. So these giant sized schools with cohorts that are at 500. So even if we apply this across a young person context, I think it's really interesting as well.
Well, we've worked with most of the largest high schools in the Southern Hemisphere now. And that's exactly the first thing we need to do. And big schools in WA, it's say, okay, how we can't meet that criteria, just a teacher class list alone across science and maths across 3 year levels, bang, we're well over 150 kids. Okay, if we can't meet it, the law says we're to act reasonably, so we have to do hazard management. And so all of a sudden we're thinking, okay, when we expect them to phone the parents, well, there's 300 potential parents. They can't do that. Well, no, let's go back a step. Dunbar's number is a legal principle for reasonableness. Yeah, some people like me forget someone's name as soon as I'm told it. My number's not 150, mine's 10, and other people are handling 400 or 500 relationships. But for us, understanding a school, we have to start by looking at how we either get things down into that manageable level for how we expect teachers to operate, or if we can't, we build scaffolds. We give them time and phone cue cards. So in a big school in WA, what do? We set up in their non-contact time a provision for 30 minutes and 3 phone calls. Then we wrote scripts. Then they met in a room where they had access to these scripts and phones, went to their corners, and they did their 3 and they left early. What we're doing there as leaders is putting in place a hazard management system to support teachers to do the things they have to do, because we understand simply expecting them to randomly do the right thing is not realistic based on Dunbar's number. And I think that was Gore-Tex. Remember the raincoats, Gore-Tex? W.L. Gore built their entire system around that anthropological principle, as did Jeff Turner in Flight Center. So yeah, if you ever get into the business side of this stuff, there's some really cool examples of how this plays out.
And Pete, I think you've started to kind of answer this question a little bit that's just come through the chat, but when there are staff members working or departments working across the school, and this gets complex, right? So any other kind of strategies or advice in that scenario?
Yeah, well, again, probably a year ago now, back on my LinkedIn feed, they'll find the blog really quickly. We talked about management support systems, and then we mapped and gave circles, which are groups, and rectangles, which are teams, and dotted line, professional reporting relationship, and straight line. And we issued like 6 of these, or probably 5, sorry, rolling charts in this blog so that you could check whether or not you've set up your structure. So so in these large schools, you might belong to a house team, or the wellbeing sort of classes might be multi-age format and tied to a house. So you might then also have to be like a HOI or a wellbeing team kind of middle leader group. You might teach into faculties as well, and you might be an aspirant leader or a member of the MLT or middle leadership team. Yeah. So the pressure really, my message to people in those larger schools, at the coalface, just get on and clear up among your peers in your team what you're doing. At the higher level, it's high value to actually map this stuff out right and release it. It's the single biggest predictor is teams being clear on who their team is and having enough time together to meet, to huddle, to do their check-ins, to look after each other. There is nothing else in the outcome research that we published that has a larger impact than that.
Yeah, really fascinating. And obviously across the primary versus a really large secondary context, that looks different. In your experience, what else looks different, I suppose, for a smaller primary setting versus those larger contexts, the frameworks or the tools or the first steps?
Absolutely. So primary schools are a simpler organisational structure. If I can put my org psych hat on, they're simpler structures to engineer correctly. And so when you're trying to work out what the teams are, and you're using this 5 to 7 type number, you've either got, you can still have much larger teams, but you need tools to make that work. But yeah, you either have the year 6 teachers and the year 5 and so on, or if it's a really small school, you combine up and you have the year 5, 6 teaching team, and then you put your TAs in or you don't, depending on your teacher aid strategy. So yeah, not much complexity there. High schools, on the other hand, are the devil themselves because there is so much going on. And if you can't map it right, well, if you can't even map it in a simple way, you can't expect anyone to be able to navigate that complexity. And high schools are my passion point because the kids themselves are going through a whole lot at that age. We did a 4,000 student wellbeing research project, and we found that their help-seeking behaviour crashes through the floor in grade 8 and doesn't get back up, really. And of all the things that need to happen as kids go through adolescence and they're making decisions about their career, etc., they need strong help-seeking skills and so help-seeking efficacy or confidence in themselves. So I've got this huge passion project around all of the tools and tricks that we can just put into the background in high schools that make the kids feel a little clearer about help-seeking, that make staff peer support better. Again, longitudinal work we did showed in one particular high school, peer support among teachers, because we measure it weekly in a pulse. Every time that went progressively up from the start of the year to the end of the year, so I just want to slow down. This is just teachers in their teams going, I feel like I'm being supported. That's it. But every time that happened across these faculties, student A's went through the roof. But here's the rub, the null hypothesis. Every time peer support started here, and then by the end of the year, it was gone down a little bit in a faculty, student A's dropped as well. And while we're 4 or 5 years into that longitudinal data set, it's the same thing. And so I feel like one of the messages I'd love to help us here together to share perhaps with our superiors or whoever we need to, is to connect the dots between working effectively in a team at one end and high academic outcomes in the classroom at the other end. we seem to be so caught up now in, are we following a particular procedure of teaching, and is the bump it up wall correct, and are we, the 5 questions, and those things are essential. Like me in my job, I've got to be best practice. But my best practice simply gets me to the starting line of this game. That doesn't create excellence. It's the team environment, it's the support, it's the efficacy, it's the capacity. It's cruising around the school with my cup full of energy, ready to have a go or reach deeper in with a student. To me, that's what this is about.
Yeah, I really love that that's where you've taken this part of the conversation, Pete, because I did want to dig into that, is how much of what we're talking about is transferable? What else should we or could we be teaching young people in this space?
Well, that again, in the last, say, 3 or 4 years of this 12, however long year journey, most of what we do is now in a student leadership committee format. And certainly like the student pulse, that's from about grade 3 to year 12. So that's a measurement system with boosters and activities, and we're very systems orientated because teachers come and go. What we need is that same support always being available to everyone in the school regardless. So the wellbeing or efficacy measurement and support piece, that's entirely translatable and has been done so for a long time. The team profile, the communication matching stuff, that's entirely translatable. Indeed, that has way bigger outcomes. We did some work with a trade college where when we got kids to put the sticky dots on their laptop about their personality, why they're a bit more relational or a bit more creative or whatever, relief teachers could praise the kids simply by matching the right praise word with the dots, right? So you didn't need this deep relationship knowledge. Obviously, we want that. But if I don't know Pete and I go, oh, that's Pete, and I know this theory, I go, oh, good job, Pete. That's amazing. And Pete beams emotionally and tries harder in the class. But if I don't have these prompts available, I just praise Pete the way I would like to be praised, which may not be that. It might be, oh, thank you, you're working so hard, Pete. And then poor old Pete's like, really? Whatever, I don't care. So some of the tools we used to get teachers to understand and rapidly team build and all of this absolutely work in the student context. But moreover, to finish that story, once we rolled that out across this trade college, the number of apprenticeships these kids were able to get went up dramatically. We then trained the parents with this, and the kind of adverse childhood events, expressed emotion is the clinical words for it, that verbal domestic violence, that, huge tension. All of that stuff started to drop away because the parents had a completely different understanding now of how the kids push their buttons and how they might inadvertently make it worse. So yeah, there are a couple of key strands of this. The platinum rule is what we sort of wrap that one up as, that are tremendously important, not just for the students, but for the wider parents and community.
Yeah, cool. Now, Nick in the background is reminding everyone in the chat to throw your questions in. Pete, you've touched on that our participants in the room can go and see the website. There's downloadables, a bunch of different things. I guess I'd love for you to also touch on any other tools or resources that you could recommend for anyone wanting to explore this further or build a team culture.
Yeah. Look, again, the framework's probably the key thing. And again, that's just most of our documents have the HPT model in it. And that's, again, that pyramid with at the top is high performance teams. Then there's achievement and engagement. Underneath engagement is work-life wellbeing, context, leverage, diversity. Underneath achievement is performance reporting and vision and action. If people can familiarize themselves with just that framework, then what they can do is think about their team or their broader school, multiple teams, and simply pinpoint of those 4 things at the bottom of the HPT framework, which one could be clanging around, which one could be tuned up, to use the mechanic analogy. And if they can orientate and understand and start thinking that way, then they'll navigate rapidly through all of our resources and pinpoint exactly the type of thing they want to, the little 2-minute vid off YouTube they want to play to the team, and then open up the floor and get people to talk about whether this is applicable or not, or they'll be able to go straight to the right resource. But more importantly, as we say with all our templates that you've seen, Dan, many moons ago, our templates are simply there if you don't have one. And so we're very agnostic. The last thing we want to do is say to people, oh, you've just built your agile wall and now we're doing HPT, we'll have to throw out all that work. No, not at all. Not at all. What you're doing is, if you don't have already a documented illustration that your team's constructed about whatever the topic is, you grab ours and you get cracking. If you already have yours and it's working for you, you put that in its place.
Yeah.
So the two big things are just understand the framework. It's ridiculously simple, but then you'll save yourself a huge amount of time by pinpointing which one of those, we call them the 4 KPIs, which one of the 4 KPIs you want to engage with or get people moving on. And then secondly, print out the teaching team or support team or leadership team data wall off our website. It's got all the example stuff on it. And simply get you privately, put it out on the carpet, whatever you need to do, and go, right, we've already got that. Our AIP does that. Our EIA does that. And then you'll end up with somewhere that you may not have. And then before you do anything else, just scratch your head and go, you know what, would that be helpful? And if it is, that's where you begin.
Yeah, cool. If you've got, I can see in the chat, there's a resource being suggested. If you've got some great resources or some good ideas, please add them to the chat. Nick has a question. Jumping to you.
I don't have a question. I'm just jumping into people that do have questions just to cue them in.
Fantastic.
So, Bree, I can see you've got a question. You mentioned, like your question earlier was, what if leadership or the school is ready for change? But do you want to expand on your question just so we've got that greater clarity, and then Dr. Peake can lean in?
Yeah, definitely. My apologies. I came in a bit late, so I'm sorry if you've already covered this. I find it quite challenging as a teacher with like ambitions to change and seeing the change, but when it gets to leadership, whether it be senior leadership, not like YLCs or head of departments, the higher up people, they say it just tends to just stop. It doesn't actually get processed through, so it's really challenging to really process what we need. So for example, they are all about high exceptional academics and behavior, but when we're trying to express like, hey, like the kids aren't showing up with their stationery or the kids aren't listening to our instructions, like we're not feeling supported in those aspects. So my question is, how do we as teachers voice what we need to be able to perform at these higher levels without the support of the leadership when they're the last people who get the say?
Wow, that's a really good question. Firstly, sorry, empathy. That's hard yards, and I understand that's a very, you're not alone with that problem. Unfortunately, there are way too many teachers out there that have to carry that cross, carry that burden. Two things. One we've already covered, which is the gentle nudging. And it's hard to gently nudge people who aren't even listening in the first place, and it's probably not productive. So let's talk about the dark arts of social activism inside a school. And the dark arts of social activism is simply this. As a team, you're allowed to collect your own statistics about what you're encountering. As a team, you're allowed to share that data with whomever you like within your school. And as a team, you can design a pretty funky little couple of columns on your Excel sheet, which becomes a dashboard. And when you share that dashboard with your line manager, and that might have the type of problem, the confirmation that the correct process was used, along with a quick comment about what the concern is that the school's policy wasn't followed by the leader or whatever. Anytime, we use this in healthcare as well, anytime those little dashboards start to once a month as a routine wind up in your team leader's email, along with a, hey, I'm just keeping you in the loop, this is how we're doing it right now, and this is what we're seeing. Again, we'd love to get your feedback on that. I'd suggest you'd only be doing that 2 or 3 times in one term before the world will spin. But at no time are you doing anything wrong. You're not talking out of school. You're not in any way blaming anybody for anything. You're just creating a data trail, and that data trail will compel people to act. But back to you, Bree. You may have already done that. If so, feel free to comment on that.
Well, yeah. The problem is, like I mentioned, I think a lot of people are scared to actually be honest. Even though we talk about it in our departments and talk about it, when we meet each other from different departments, I think people are just very scared to be honest because, their job might be, up for grabs, or just, I don't know. I just have that. I've been at the school for a while now, and there's a lot of change that needs to happen, but it doesn't follow through. So
if I can jump in there, It's a team dashboard or whatever committee or group, whatever the name is of the people who are meeting. And it's filled out during the team meeting. And it's information from team members. In other words, it's anonymous. Okay, so it's not anonymous as in the people who are members of the team are sharing their information, submitting it through the team leader to whoever with their recommendation about what needs to happen. When they said, oh, well, who? That's when you just draw a line and say, we do this under Chatham House rules during our team meeting, and we present this to you as a way to try to partner with you to keep improving our school.
Yeah.
You just turned your mic off there, Brie.
No, thank you. That's great.
Yeah,
I
so
really appreciate it.
you can do it because what you're presenting is the team feedback, and you just draw a line in the sand. So the team leader might get some heat. Well, why do you allow them to talk about this in the meeting? You go, oh, well, we're playing with HBT tools. Give them my mobile number. Like at the end of the day, you're simply sharing group information up the pipe. And I agree with you. You can't necessarily share individual information up the pipe because in your cultural context, that may not go well. But there is safety in numbers.
Yes, yes, that's right.
Thank you for your question, Brie. Look, we are out of time, Pete. That time just flew by. Look, I'd love for everyone to know that they can reach out to Pete, check out the website, put through an inquiry, send a question. We're happy to pass anything on to Pete as well and help with that. Pete, can I quickly check in? I like to ask this question of all our guests. I know you've got a new book out, and I know there's lots of things that kind of you're busy reading, but what kind of podcast or book or research are you into at the moment?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So, a couple of things. So in terms of, I don't know, quasi-professional podcasts, I'm a big fan of Diary of a CEO at the moment. And The Imperfects is a bit of a fave. I like Jenny Cole, good friend of mine in WA. So a lot of the educators are fantastic. And of course, you guys. In terms of books, though, I'm on a bit of a binge. If anyone's reading my blogs, they'll know that, about Gabor Mate and the Myth of Normal. I've just got Mel Robbins' book, Let Them. So I've just started into that. But a really cool one is an older one, Ryan Halliday's The Obstacle is the Way. It's an older book now. But I've heard it so many times. Anyway, I finally took it away and read it, and it was just amazing. So yeah, have a few to talk about. And then Heyman Sunam is another guy, Haemin, and he's kind of a Zen practitioner, monk type. But he's got a heap of really, really good podcasts. And he's got a book, When Things Don't Go Your Way. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff. But I'm definitely more on that personal reflection bent at the moment in my life.
Oh, wow. Some awesome recommendations there. And some people in the chat who are loving that too. Pete, I really want to say thank you so much for being with us. Some really fascinating conversation, and really appreciate the time for you to be with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for our guests, thank you so much for joining us. We're a little bit over time today, but I do want to quickly do a shout out to our next live learning. So Wednesday, the 27th of August, we're going to be digging into middle leadership as our topic, with middle leadership aspiring, developing, thriving. We've got some guests who are going to unpack mentoring relationships and some ways to develop aspiring leaders to thrive in schools. So really looking forward to that conversation. But for today, that is it for this conversation around high performance teams. Thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. So take care. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.